Let's talk clock. So I'll turn you over to Dan Huber and Jason Riendeau with competition shaping policy.
So, my name is Dan Huber and this is Jason Riendeau, and we're this morning, or I guess this afternoon, going to talk to you about how competition shapes policy. And we're not just talking about magic competition. This is true for many different competitions. So I kind of want to get you out of that mindset for a second. And I'm going to start you off with a story. Different kind of competition. Has anyone ever heard of FIRST Robotics? All right, actually more than I expected. So for those that don't know, it's a high school robotics program. Every year there's a game that's announced. It's a challenge competition for students to build a robot for. Now, sometimes these games are like sporting events, like maybe basketball. They've had some that resemble basketball and some that resemble soccer, but sometimes they're a little different, like hanging tubes on a wall. Or this year's game is to siege a tower in the medieval setting. It's pretty cool. But anyway, I was on a team back in my high school. I was on a team. I'm thinking of a game in 2011, which is an example of when we hang tubes on a wall. And I was one of the operators of the robot. Every team has 2 students to go and actually control the robot on a field. And these games have 6 robots competing at the same time on 2 teams of 3. It's just to give some context. So you have 6 robots going around in 6 teams competing. And in this particular game, at the end, there is a bonus that's given to robots who can, launch a mini robot, just like a smaller one, has to climb a pole. And you not only get points for doing it, but you get more points if you do it faster than the other robots can. And you can only do this in the last 10 seconds of the game, or else they would disable the pole, and even if it climbed, it wouldn't count. And this wasn't automated or anything. They had somebody look at the poles for looking at poles, and I guess they'd have a watch here and say at 10 seconds, and they would see if the mini robot touched the pole before the 10-second mark, then they click the button and the pole was up. Now, it was my job to put these mini robots up the pole, and I was usually wary to wait until or to do it at exactly 10 seconds because humans are prone to error. Like if someone's eyeing it as opposed to being automated, there's some room for something to go wrong. And so I usually did it around 9 seconds. And in this case, I did it at the 9-second mark because the mini robot was fast enough anyway, and I was pretty confident that it would get to the top fast enough. And we would have gotten second place in the mini bots if a referee didn't disable the pole. They had decided that it had been before 10 seconds where I launched it when it had actually been 9 seconds. And we had footage to back that up, honestly. Our team was recording all matches and everything, and that was something that would be there. So I went to challenge the ruling. There's a box where there's a place you can go to ask questions about it. And then I would tell them, like, look, this is what we saw. We're very sure that it happened after the 10-second mark that this was a legal play, and we have footage to back it up. And then they say, well, I mean, I'm gonna, I guess, paraphrase, like that's like we don't really believe that and we can't see the footage. And it's a policy that they can't see the footage. And maybe in an off-season non-competitive event, maybe they could see the footage and see what happened. But this was one of the higher competitions that people are competing to get to championships. And so we kind of looked into it a little bit, and it turns out that they had a policy to not look at videos I guess they wanted to encourage fair play. They don't want to put the refs in a position where like they have to, I guess, compromise their repping ability, or maybe they think they would have to, something like that. And so often they have to err on the side of caution and make tough calls at the expense of one team, or sometimes another team. It's just something that happens. We were a little salty about it at the time, but we did well in the competition anyway, so we were happy. And in the spirit of making tough calls, I guess, Jason will talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So here's a fun tough call that I took. So the scenario is Grand Prix side event, regular REL. I'm going to throw this out to everyone as a vote. So think about what you're going to rule, and then just raise your hand when I ask for it. So player A controls Cure Great Glass Failure. That's the 2/2 flyer. Whenever someone targets it for the first time in a turn, you counter that spell. Their opponent goes in place for the first spell the entire turn, Doomblade, targeting Kira. They're both looking at each other. The player with the Doomblade picks up the Doomblade, goes, "Does this resolve?" Clearly indicating the Doomblade that they have in their hand. There's a pause. They sort of look at each other. And then the Kira player says, "Yes, it resolves." Then player B with the Doomblade goes, "Okay, so Kira's dead." And the Kira player goes, "No, it's countered." And then they call for a judge. So, who is going to rule that Kira is dead? Raise your hand, please.
More information needed.
Like what questions?
When you said it resolves, what did you mean by that, and what did you think you were saying?
Okay, so you want more information.
Yeah.
That's a great question. So they weren't terribly clear on that, as far as, does it resolve? They weren't very clear as to what was going on and how Kira's ability worked, other than encounter stuff. It wasn't getting very far on that questioning. So, I guess no showers for Kira's dead. Who says that Kira's alive because it's actually countered? Alright, sounds good. So we have a nice majority. Alright then. So, now on to the actual presentation. In order to first define and talk about how competition change policy...
Did you roll that too?
I'll tell you at the end.
You gotta mull it over a little bit.
Yeah, gotta troll these guys pretty hard. First, we need to ask, what is competition? So who can tell me what is competition?
It's an event that has some sort of goal associated with it, whether the prize is just personal pride or whatever. But there's an event with at least, I mean, sometimes it's a personal competition, but there's an event with a goal.
There's an event with a goal. Okay, that sounds pretty good.
A personal test of skill, like it tests the individual abilities of a one or more persons.
A test of skill. That is also really good. Anyone else?
It may involve chance as well, or
Sure.
sometimes uniquely chance.
Yeah, and there's always some gap in luck and skill. Everything in life is some combination of luck and or skill. It's very called non-repeatable skill sometimes. Hitting a home run is pretty lucky sometimes. You hit the ball and it's 400 feet on a 398-foot wall, but you still hit that ball really far. And the wind was pushing out that day, so it went out that day. It's not a repeatable skill, but you hit that ball really far.
I feel like maybe I'm wondering if it has to have you have to have a winner and maybe it's a non-winner or a loser with it. I wonder if that's part of it.
I mean, generally there is a winner and a loser in this, just because.
Well, it has different context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
There's.
just wondering.
I mean,
Yeah,
because
you can have,
you can, in sort of a natural, if you look at competition for resources or things like that, in that usage, there is going to be a winner and a loser because there is a goal that can only be attained one way or the other. There's a limited resource that it needs to be divided, whether that limited resource is food or winning a Magic game.
Yeah.
But then in common usage also we tend to use competition to also do for just things for marathons or things like that where it's a personal goal growth where it's not.
People competing for supremacy.
People competing for supremacy. Yeah. So it sounds like we've hit pretty much all the points I want to bring up. It's playing to win. Generally in a competition, the goal is to win by some metric that is dependent on the game. Dave Serlin does a really good article. I'll have a link to it on Playing to Win. He did a book on it as well. This is a little bit different than, let's say, just playing Magic for fun. I have a theme deck where my goal is to Visus my opponent's autochthon worm. That's mostly just because I want to say that sentence. And, that's not playing to win, other than the fact that when I play to win, I'm not running out the Visus or the autochthon worm. And I'm not showing up to my, regional PTQ with that deck. It's a testing of skills. There is some luck involved, absolutely, but in general, every competition has some aspect of skill. Even luck heavy ones like, let's say, poker, still have some aspect of skill. It has an organized play environment. You may know them as tournaments. You don't necessarily have to have a tournament. You can do, for example, a league. Everyone comes in for a month with a deck, and you play 3 matches each week. And whoever wins the most matches gets some cool prize. And usually competitions have some prizes. Even if it's not necessarily financial, you get to have your name out there on the internet as, hey, I won this thing. And you get the bragging rights. I know one place had a really cool belt for someone who won, and you got to walk around with a nice big belt buckle that said you won. Sure, that's a prize. People were competing for it. And it has some form of coverage generally. You hype up who wins because that's a way to tell people, hey, someone won. People get excited about your tournaments, and that's great. So now Dan wants to talk about some of the characteristics of competition.
So the characteristics that I'm going to talk about are they're true for all competitions, not just Magic, as I kind of emphasize a little bit. And I guess does anyone have anything at the top of their mind that maybe they think might be a characteristic? All right. Well, I'll give an example. Well, people expect to pay money. They're going to go to competition. They're gonna have some input. Maybe it's not always money, but that's for larger Magic events, that's what it ends up being. Players don't pay money and pay money and go out of their way unless they intend on doing well. And I don't want to give the impression that we don't want players to have fun. This is just kind of something that they have to balance with their competitiveness. And they're not really there to make friends either. Not usually. They're kind of they're ultimately play a game, and as I said before, so the interactions can be kind of as far as it's more like what's on your field, or is it my turn yet, or or ending my turn or something like that. Other than that, not too much, but we're kind of focused on what's in front of them, and before, when they introduce themselves to each other, then they'll sit down and they'll shuffle, and in Magic's case, they'll put their decks, shuffle them, and then they'll present, and then that's the point where everything goes quiet. Everything before might be a little friendly, but at this point, if the game's begun, no distractions, everyone's there. They're there for their purpose. And these players, they spend time preparing. They spend weeks, maybe months. In Magic's case, it's building the right deck, testing it, maybe changing the sideboard a little bit, playing against their matchups, so you get strategy for these matchups. But in another tournament First, maybe they're just practicing the robot or fixing it up, making it more robust. Maybe in a Super Smash Bros. Competition, they're just doing more practicing, figuring out which characters they're best with, just things like that. The point is they spend a long time preparing for these. And players will make mistakes in every competition. That's true everywhere. Nobody will do 100% no mistakes 100% of the time. They'll slip up somewhere, and competitions they usually punish for that. They don't really have other things to blame their mistakes on. Maybe some players will try to blame on variance or just dumb luck, as you mentioned before. But ultimately, it's up to them to make sure, or to do what they can to give themselves the best chance of winning without cheating, obviously. And they need to learn from these mistakes. And if they do something wrong, either they're going to learn from it and do better next time, or they're going to choose to ignore it and keep making the same mistake. And competitions they kind of help players do that. And players need to know that they're good play. If they play well, it'll lead to good outcomes. They play well, they'll do well. They'll maybe win some cash, win some prizes. And they need to know that the competition is doing what it can to make sure that these players aren't losing something that's not completely out of their control. In the baseball example, they don't have wind that they blame it on, unless maybe there's the wind flips up a card on their deck or something. I don't even want to get into that.
Outdoor tournaments tend to really be bad ideas for just that reason.
They need to know that if they win or lose, it was mostly based on themselves, or on their skill. And moving on to the Yeah, this is a concept called called agency. Yeah, players think that their decisions should matter. Their play should matter. What they decide to do in a game at a time. It should make a difference, either good or bad. And like, I'm just trying to emphasize the point where there's not as much luck in there as they don't want to be at the mercy of luck. So that's what I'm trying to emphasize.
Has anyone heard that term agency before by any chance? Most people. Oh, great. So we have a link to it. I scoured the internet, and there's roughly 1,000 articles on it, and I picked out like the best one, but there's roughly 1 million others.
And yeah, moving on to the player expectation. What do players expect? I know this sounds a little similar to the last one, a characteristic. Yeah.
That'll be fair, but it's not, weighted towards certain competitors or away from them.
Absolutely, yeah. Everyone needs to have an equal advantage going. It shouldn't depend on anything but their skill.
That it'll be understandable that there are rules that are well defined and that are knowable beforehand.
Absolutely, they need to know what they're getting themselves into. They need to know exactly what they can and can't do, what cards they can and cannot use, and what strategies they can and cannot employ, things like that.
I think it's a worthwhile endeavor that they're going for the prize that was posted and that it's a prize that they actually are interested in.
Yeah, they need to make sure that the cost, the cost that they're paying, we're not, it's probably a bad idea to have a $100 entrance fee and have the cost be, and the prize be a max of one pack of over the day one.
Yeah.
That's not something that players want. They need to know that, they need to know exactly what they're about to do today. And what happens when they lose it, they don't do this well, they walk home with nothing. If they do a little better than that, maybe they get something small, and things like that.
That's actually a huge part about agency is that people can make informed decisions, and that those decisions will be reflected in what will happen. In the case of that, if they show up to a tournament with a $100 entry fee and they get a pack of the gate watch because it just says prizes TBD, they're gonna be really upset. But if they know going into it, if you win, you're getting a pack, and you pay $100, you can choose to not go to that tournament.
You're also probably the winner.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine paying $100 for a pack of the gate watch, but if I make that decision consciously, then I made that decision. At that point, I own that decision.
I think also consistency, and the consistency can be within that event. Like if I come in and they say there's prizes to top 8, and then in the middle of the event they change it to prizes for top 4, that's inconsistent. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is consistency event to event. So if I know that this place tends to have, I don't know, it's always too hot in there, or it's always too cold, or there's always enough space, or there isn't, I want to go somewhere where I can get that consistency. I know what to expect before I come in. I mean, I'm using the word expectations, but I know what, tied to all this, I know what I'm getting into before I go there, and it's going to be the same or similar each time.
Yeah. Right, exactly. You guys touched on a bit of what I was going to say. The first point, part of it is, players knew what they're going to get themselves into. That's what I was going to lead off with. But the next one was traveling. Some players need to travel to get there, or some further than others. And sometimes, if it's a big enough event, you'll get players from even out of the country, even across language barriers. And this needs to not be a disadvantage for those players. Like if there's somebody who speaks mostly Spanish but kind of broken English who goes into a pizza queue or something, and they want to make sure that the rules need to be there to help them. Like you can't have a situation where somebody is saying I'm going to move to entering combat step, so whatever, something like that, and the opponent needs to know what they're saying. The rules have shortcuts for this. You can just say go to combat or I'm about to attack or something. Players need to be able to understand what's going on, and the rules kind of help. The rules have things in there to help out with that. This is the common basis for communication, as mentioned. It doesn't have to be perfect English, but the rules have to facilitate this.
That's why we have shortcuts. Turns out that Magic is played sometimes internationally, and not everyone shares a language. So having shortcuts means it's much easier to communicate with what's going on.
I know it makes for some interesting judge calls when there's a language barrier.
Oh yeah,
because there was a Star City Games, modern, whatever it's called, for PIQ 5K, whatever they're calling it these days, where there was an Asian pro player. I believe he was from Japan, but I'm not certain. And he was on Jund, and his opponent was on a blue-white deck, whatever. And he cast Cryptic. But his opponent didn't quite understand what modes he wanted on Cryptic, so he goes stack, tap, and whatever the other mode was, and then wanted to respond. But the opponent called the judge because he began to tap his permanents to display what mode he was trying to ask his opponent. This is like a very, very clear example of what the language barrier was I don't understand what you're doing, but if I spoke perfect English, the judge calls very clear.
Yeah, that's why we have, again, a lot of shortcuts for just that reason. Because on the forums, we'll get a lot of discussions about, hey, I want to go and, say, I'm going to enter my beginning of combat step. Can I make my opponent, misplay Cryptic so I can play Ball Lightning? That's a super old one that keeps coming up, as I'm sure some of the people in this room know a whole heck of a lot. And, there's a reason why that shortcut's here. Just that way, when there's language issues, we can point out and say, yeah, look at that. Stop doing that.
So players, players expect that other players will be playing their best, playing more tightly. They won't be as prone to making errors. They won't make as many mistakes, or will be at least more cautious about them anyway. They're not going to start holding their hand a certain way so that their opponent may see their cards, or they're going to be more careful about that. They're not going to start tapping mana until they're sure what they want to play. And players are expecting other players to play the same way, and they're rewarded for that. I'm going to go to, I guess, a low-hanging for a miss triggers example. If you miss your trigger, you miss your trigger. There are very clear rules telling you when you missed it, and if you missed it, that's your own fault. And you're expected to play keeping your cards into account, keeping all the things that would benefit you into account, so you don't miss anything. And of course, the way the tournaments work, or the way competitions work, is it rewards you for making those less of those mistakes. There's a particular quote. A player should have an advantage due to better understanding of the options presented by the rules of the game and superior tactical planning. This kind of ties it all together. As we've been kind of hammering on about, players know what they're getting themselves into. They know the rules. They play the rules, and the judges are there to make sure no one's going outside of that. Make sure they're all playing within this boundary, and they need to work with that and their own skill level. There's not really much else that should be a part of it. Other than non-repeatable skill. Referees. That's why we have referees, to make sure that this is consistent.
So that quote has actually recently changed.
Yes, it used to say something a lot more less useful, which is just knowledge overall was rewarded, and they updated that so that way it actually reflects. People should be rewarded for being good at magic and magic-related skills, and not just trying to troll for 1,000 judge calls in hopes of getting GRV upgrades and stuff.
And not fetching from the Vault Realms Dryad Arbor to attack for 1 by putting it in the middle of 5 other forests.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a pretty legit bluff, but it's just that's a not very legit bluff when your opponent goes and plays Damnation and you just conveniently forget to put in your graveyard. That's not superior knowledge of the rules or tactical planning. That's called cheating.
Exactly. So moving on. Here's an easy one. It's on any competition level.
Regular.
Hey.
Very good. Yep.
Professional.
Wow. We're on a roll. Any others?
Competitive.
Hey, wow. Okay. Perfect. Any others?
Pointless.
Casual.
Okay.
No problem.
All right.
Yeah. Hey, we have a kitchen table, as a matter of fact. It turns out that's the thing that you can sanction events for. This is how you do conspiracy drafts. This is how you do Two-Headed Giant. This is how you do Two-Headed Giant Vintage. That actually sounds super fun. I kind of want to try that with someone. I'm not going to lie.
Sadly, you can't sanction a proxy event.
Oh, I have legit power.
But does your partner?
It doesn't matter. My partner can't use my power. My partner's going to have to be Mr. Force of the Will deck. Seems fine for vintage.
They should troll you, bring null rods.
That's certainly pretty trolling, going to be honest with you.
It doesn't even do anything.
No, it does nothing.
All right. So is that the only thing that we have for regular for RELs for this stuff? Maybe. So the answer is yes. That's pretty much all we have for RELs. But how about the idea of multiple levels of competition with within the same REL? Is that a thing that shows up?
Sort of in that like the grinders at a Grand Prix are basically like the lightest form of competitive REL.
I would say GPT's in store, but you're not wrong on that.
At my store, they have not quite high price, but like significant prizes run at regular, and the only people that show up are the really, really competitive players. So when I'm judging that, I'll judge it almost at competitive, where I force rules because people are there to practice for the larger events, so they want to know what would happen at the bigger events. So I run that very competitively. Whereas when I'm at Friday Night Magic, I'm completely laid back. I'm very relaxed about everything. So within that rel alone, I'm ranging from fairly relaxed to I'm practically at competitive.
Sure. And that's actually one of the things that we do at my local store. We have three different FNMs. We have Commander. We have a free standard that you can have an optional buy-in to get some packs if you win. And we have a modern where we give out 2 boxes to top 4. So we have a big stratification. You want to go there and hang out and play cool Commander? Sure, we can do that. You want to go and play Standard and target it as hey, you're just getting into Magic? Come and play in this. It's Standard. You don't have to go and deal with all these people who have been playing forever. And you want to win cool prizes? We have Modern. Come win some boxes. And there's definitely a big stratification between that. And so the expectations, player-wise, are pretty different between them. And that's a very cool thing that regular REL and how loose the jar is allows us to do. At competitive events are competitive. There are definitely more competitive feeling events and they're all competitive and they all have the same expectations, but there's players have differing expectations between like a Grand Prix trial at your local store with 12 players versus a Grand Prix where you have 3,000 players 2 weekends ago. And so even though they're the same competitive REL, they feel different to players, and that's something that the IPG doesn't address, but it can't because competitive should be competitive.
So should this be? So I'm going to throw this question sort of back at you, especially with regards to regular, right?
Yep.
So you're talking about player expectations.
Yep.
How do I know if I am playing in your event at regular?
Yep.
Whether or not I'm playing at a high regular or a medium regular or a, what your version of high regular might be versus his version of high regular? Shouldn't I be able to come to an event and if it's at regular, expect that if I make a mistake in the standard tournament and I make the exact same mistake, if I'm in the modern section, that will be treated similarly?
Sure. So as judges, we have a lot of flexibility with that, and one of the useful questions is, how competitive do you expect it to be? I'll actually be getting into this on the next slide, so hold on to the rest of that for right now.
So I was just going to give another example of if you have a comp event and you end up where you're in round 3 and the O2 table is like the father and the son who both showed up. That's a stark contrast from table 1, even within the same event.
Sure. I mean, if there's an infraction, you still treat that as infraction as an infraction. Yeah. But there will definitely be a much different player handling necessary. And so at that very high competitive table, there's much more of an expectation on, let's just get this ruling and get on with our life. Whereas at a lower table, I don't want to say you should have more customer service because we should always try for the most customer service possible. But a much more detailed answer that doesn't go into coaching may be helpful for some of the rules questions that will come up, for example. So does anyone remember the old school 5 RELs?
Yeah, long
I
time
must say,
ago.
John, didn't you actually write like that IPG at one point?
I was one of the senior policy people during a lot of that time. Yeah.
Okay, so I sort of feel like you should have that. So,
Yeah. I remember them.
So, when I first started judging a while ago, there were 5 RELs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They were conveniently named because there were 5 and they just needed some numbers. It actually matched up really well to how the organized play system was set up. 1 was for pre-releases. 2 was everything else. 3 was PTQs. 4 was Grand Prix. 5 was a Pro Tour. And so you have this nice feeder system in terms of people start playing Magic in a tournament environment. They start at 1, maybe 2. And then they went and merged them a couple years back into regular. 3 and 4 were, again, the same. All the penalties, all the remedies were the same. It's just there were 3 and 4 because Pro Tour Qualifier versus Grand Prix, we need a distinction because of reasons. That was merged up into competitive. And that actually segues pretty well into the idea of never seen regular. So you can have a variance in terms of how people interact at regular. I know that when I'm playing FNM at the same modern tournament, I'm playing against one friend, and we play much like it's just playtesting. We don't really care too much. If there's a serious problem, we'll address it. But takebacks, that sort of stuff, is a lot more casual. Whereas another friend, we're playing and it's on. There's no takebacks. We're playing like it's a Pro Tour, top 8 or something. And so, even though in the same event, I have differing expectations, and it's helpful sometimes to communicate with your players as to what those expectations are. The TO can set expectations as well. For example, that prize structure I was talking about, you can help set expectations. When there's boxes on the line and a top 4 cut, that's a really good way to set some expectations. In general, if you have 4-round events with some prizes based on record, that's going to be, hey, you're going to go and play some Magic, you're going to win some packs, and we're going to go on and have fun. When you have a cut, it becomes a lot more competitive feeling, and so players can see some of that. If they're new to the store, obviously, the first thing that we should do is say, hey, you're new to the store. I'm, Jason, I'm the judge. Although you probably want to use your name instead of mine. You can use my name. I'm not going to stop you, but it's going to get really awkward for you real fast.
That's also helpful to get a feel for the player, too, because if
Yes.
somebody comes in, I've had events where the pre-release and somebody thinks it's competitive and they're trying to force their opponent to do something because of some way they pointed or something. And if you introduce yourselves to them, you'll get a feel for, hey, this is a person that thinks it's going to be a certain way when it's not, or the other way around, or when I get called over for a judge call, how do I want to interact with them because they know the rules really well or they don't? What do they expect so we can provide them better customer service, I think.
Yeah. And it's very helpful to talk to them sort of what they're expecting on this interaction. As soon as they come in, you just talk to them, hey, what are we trying to accomplish with this tournament? Like the modern one, you're coming to win some boxes. And that will help set expectations for them, and so that way you can meet their expectations on that.
I was thinking even F&M, if you're a player and a judge, you don't wear a judge shirt and stuff, so when they make a judge call and you come over, now you've kind of established that, hey, I can help you out and stuff like that, as opposed to them feeling like some random person is coming over to tell them what to do in their game.
Sure, and it depends on what you're trying to do with your judge shirt. Generally, I prefer to not wear judge shirts for F&Ms, but if you're in a store where that's helpful, then you're in a store that's helpful. Thankfully, policy is very flexible on this, and you can do what makes the most sense for everyone. So one of the emphasis on regular, and this is a big tension, is education versus technical play. And that gets into like the cure scenario that I was talking about. That gets into the different examples of my one friend versus the other when I play. On one of them, there's an emphasis on education, where I'm helping my friend get better, and the other of them is we want to go and play some Magic like it's a Pro Tour top 8, and we both have different tensions in that, and different levels in the same event. There's the old school 5 RELs was at least somewhat clear as to how competitive is, how competitive regular is. That is gone. I think it's better that it's gone, but it definitely is a little bit less clear in terms of how to set expectations necessarily. You look confused, Eric.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that statement, but
sure. So the thing is, when you talk about the RELs, 3 versus 4, 4 is bigger and therefore it's more competitive, right?
Well, I'm saying currently, right?
Yeah.
You're saying that because we've rolled what used to be a 5-level system into what is in effect a 3-level system, and in fact, it's gone down from there as well because there really aren't penalty differentials anymore.
Yep.
Because it used to be even in sort of the smaller system that you had different penalties for different offenses, and now that has all sort of been wiped out. There's less of a penalty difference. There's not really any of this remnant of professional had even stricter penalties than competitive. Like the penalties for various infractions are basically the same.
That part is gone.
Yeah, that part is gone. So I think that, you've mentioned this a couple of times in the seminar that you can have within the context sort of these different levels of what you're comfortable enforcing or not, and I think that that's actually potentially somewhat dangerous road to go down. In that, if you're saying that, for example, if you're at a GP day 1 and you take a call at table 5, you're somehow going to assess or treat them, to a higher standard than if you take a call at table 500. I think that is potentially a dangerous notion to have out there. So that's why I say I'm not exactly necessarily on board with this idea that you can enforce things based on what the players expect the enforcement to be, because you don't really have an idea of what that is. In fact, as a term, and I think what we're striving for with policy is to actually normalize that, so that doesn't happen anymore, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. At competitive is competitive, and you should ideally be making the same ruling everywhere. There is a difference in the Grand Prix example. And at table 5, you will get that call. At table 500, you probably will not if they're that far out of contention.
Well, and that's a reality of what calls we will see.
Yeah.
Right? But if we do, in fact, get the call, then, and I'm also not going to argue that it is not a reality of the case that many, many judges, and I include myself in this at times, although I'm striving to work against it, will in fact treat table 500 differently, because who cares what the college might have, they're out of contention, they're not winning any prizes, they're just playing fun to have it, but it matters to them because they're still there, right? There's a reason the table 500 is still playing, right? Because they just want to play Magic, and they are deserving of equal treatment. Now what will probably happen is that it will be a less contentious call.
It will definitely be a much less contentious call.
The chances that call going way off, but there will be people who could be cheating at table 500, right?
Yep.
Just because they're not good does not necessarily, or have not done well, does not necessarily mean that they are not capable of doing something intentionally wrong.
Yep.
Right.
Eric Shukan does have a story about DQing someone at the very last table because they wanted to just win a match. And that is a thing that we do need to keep an eye on. And that is, for competitive is competitive regardless of how competitive it feels. It does affect what calls you will get. If someone asks for a take back at table 500, you're going to make the same ruling as you would at table 5, but you will not get that call.
And that's true. And there's lines in policy to sort of support that now too. I don't know if you're going to get into that. Certainly about
policy is very unclear as to the entire existence of takebacks, and this is a very mucky line. Thankfully, we're talking about regular in this slide. As regular, there is a broad flexibility.
But again, all right. So with regular, again, that still goes down to this issue of within the course of an event, should the expectations even though you do have that flexibility, shouldn't you be striving to keep a consistent standard? Either enforce everything at the same level and not go from call to call what you feel is appropriate, right? Is that...
So at regular, it gives you the flexibility to treat people differently. And if two people want to treat it as a Pro Tour top 8, then you can feel free to treat it as a Pro Tour top 8. If people want to just go and play Magic because it's fun, then treat it as if they want to play Magic because it's fun.
I think as a default, as a judge, you should approach the call as treating it like at regular. You should approach the call as treating it like people want to play Magic like it's fun. Because if people want to treat it like it's a Pro Tour top 8, they will usually tell you. Like, I have gotten before, okay, if we were competitive, what would be the penalty? What would be the fix? Let's do that fix.
And then the other thing is, if you have a judge call at both of those tables in round 1, and then the winners get paired, you've set 2 different precedents.
Yeah.
With the players that are now paired for round 2.
Sure, that is very true on that. And if the players have an agreement between themselves as to how they're playing it, so be it. Feel free to acknowledge it. If they don't, feel free to acknowledge it as you best see as befits the tournament as a whole.
Yeah, so one of the big things is, as judges, we have the documents that we can fall back on, so there's not this perception of bias. If I go and the documents prescribe that this is a game loss for this action, or this is how we fix this particular thing, if somebody says, I don't agree with that, we can point to that and say, this is the document that says this is what I'm supposed to do, I'm supposed to put a random card back, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the problem is at regular, it's pretty, I mean, the jar is 1 page, which is meant to give you more freedom for education.
Yeah, they've originally upped it to like a page and a half.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
So the fixes are very murky, but I do want to move on, because Dan wants to talk about some of the prescribed fixes at Comp RL.
I just want to ask one quick thing on regular versus comp. Is how hard do you push and when do you push for, Tio says this is going to be a regular event and there's $1,000 cash prizes. You know, how hard do you push for that to get moved up to competitive?
I will generally tell TOs this is a really good idea because you have a significant prize on the line, and generally, 1Ks have been competitive in this area. And it's very helpful to reference the rest of the area. We have a bunch of 1Ks up in Massachusetts, and they're all competitive. So it's really easy to say, these other 5 stores are doing competitive 1Ks, you're doing a regular. And this is a weird expectation considering every other store does it this way. Have you considered doing it at competitive?
Well, so I guess at early in Magic's history, players do, I guess they need to, like when they like early in competitions, they do these things that they think are right, and eventually kind of policy evolves around that. In this case, eventually we got prescribed fixes, like things that are explicitly written out, because maybe it happens so often that they needed something for that. And it's a little different at competitive than regular. At regular, if there's a mistake, it's basically either you fix it or you don't. It's really up to the players to really touch upon the kind of game that they want to play. And there's a little bit more nuance in Comp REL. And there's this big document telling you what kind of triggers are missed. It details that very well. And it sets a precedence for players and judges to look to. And the whole point is that it's very clear, and it's something later, something you can reference. And as we mentioned a little bit before, it doesn't favor anyone. It doesn't really. It doesn't favor any one person over another. It's very even. It doesn't matter what place you are in the event. If you miss the trigger, you miss the trigger. And so players, when they should be able to predict how a ruling might, or how something might rule. Like, I mean, they both might have their own opinions on, or their version of the facts. I guess what they think happened in their mind, and they'll say, well, this happened, so this is the way to rule. And somebody else might say, well, no, it didn't happen exactly that way, but so I think this is how it'll rule. But either way, they're supposed to be able to predict what happened or what would happen based on these prescribed fixes. And it gets rid of any accusation for bias. Judges can't be accused of being biased if they have something to point to. And my guess is that this is something that happened at one point in the history of competitions. Somebody has been accused of being biased. So the whole prescribed fixes.
By history of competitions, you mean every competition ever since the beginning of time?
Yeah. I think it's a pretty safe assumption. That something like that's happened before.
Yes, the reps are always in somebody's pocket, whatever pocket it is. It's not your team's.
The other thing that can happen is you can get trapped in a situation where you can't make a decision because the policy isn't clear.
Right.
And I can give you a real quick good example was at one point somebody played a tutor and they named Negator, and the tutor says name a card. But because the policy a long time ago wasn't clear, the opponent let it go and then said, well, you can't find that card, therefore your demonic consultation doesn't work, and blah, blah, blah. But we didn't have the policy to fall back on, so even senior judges felt like, well, the statement that they made is true, therefore I have to rule that way. But it wasn't, for the overall competition, you couldn't point to policy and say, this is why I'm ruling the way I'm ruling.
Yeah, right. You need to, at some points you kind of need to use your judgment, but these prescribed fixes can't cover everything. There are always in some cases. And yeah, they don't have to, like judges don't have to evaluate how much this thing has affected the game on the spot. They can just either say, did it happen or did it not? How much did it hurt the game or the integrity of the competition? And we're running a little on time, so I'm just gonna
Sure. So I want to briefly talk about outside assistance. We all know it's bad, except at regular REL, it turns out. We like to have people talking at regular REL. Obviously, if there's an excessive amount of talking, we want to get them to not talk because of slow play concerns. But, for example, continuous construction is a thing. And we encourage people, hey, we want you to play some Magic. We want to help you learn how to get better. Obviously, there's differing expectations on it. You just need to make it very clear as to, continuous construction isn't allowed, for example.
So my understanding was that outside assistance in terms of deck building is encouraged, but in terms of actual play is discouraged.
In terms of play, generally yes, just because I actually have yet to see that really happen because people just know better in general. But there's no, hey, discourage this, like show spectators. We want people to play Magic, and if some OA happens, and someone is upset about it, deal with the upset player. But there's no, we must shoo away spectators, part of that.
Well, there's a difference, too, between outside assistance strategic and outside assistance of correct gameplay. Like, if people are playing and they say, oh, that doesn't work that way, or we want to encourage them to be involved and say that, whereas obviously higher we don't.
Yeah.
Also, outside assistance used to be an epidemic at my store at regular. I'm always telling people that outside assistance, you can't do that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one where player education is important. Turns out outside assistance is a match loss like competitive.
We want people to be able to.
And the reason is that the match just cannot physically continue as normal after that. Once someone learns out some stuff, I can't just, back it up like I can Wrath of God for 3 colors and a white. I just can't reach into their brain and go, hey, there's a nice new info. And it's gone now. It turns out that's why USC Major's a match loss as well. Once someone decides to drop, a racial slur or something, the room tone changes. Someone has just said something that's horribly offensive, and it doesn't really matter that that person just lost. Something is fundamentally different for someone who's affected by that, and there's no way to undo that. It's very strongly discouraged, and that's part of the reason why there's an automatic DQ upgrade for a couple of circumstances. Because once that's out there, it used to be game loss. It was upgraded to a match loss for the reason that, you sit down, you drop a racial slur to your opponents, you get a game loss, and now they're super on tilt. That's a thing that just made the match just completely different, and we need to make sure that just doesn't happen. So, speaking of unsupporting conduct, hey Dan.
So I'm just gonna talk briefly about how, the rules of the competition is kind of evolved around like the types of players or the types of conduct of players. We have players who practice good sportsmanship, those who will maybe let somebody put their trigger on the stack when they maybe at the expense of maybe their overall result, but they want to play the game they want to play, and they're willing to do that. Some people are overly competitive, or maybe not overly, but they like maybe there's a fun side of them that kind of wanted the other person to catch their trigger, but they're not going to let their competitive side tell them that. Like they're as we've been emphasizing, they're there to win. And then there are players that are unsportsmanlike. There are players, as Jason mentioned, maybe they'll drop racial slurs, or maybe they'll throw cards across the table. Maybe they'll yell at other people when they lose because they're not willing to admit why they lost. That their maybe deck isn't as good, or maybe there was some wrong with it. And so, as you mentioned, we can DQ people for unsportsmanlike conduct. We want like the rules kind of make it so everybody can feel welcome and they account for these different types of player conduct. And there's a good example of someone who misses something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty clearly you as a minor.
And competitive.
And regular, you tell them to stop doing that. Alright, and a couple of quick links for you. The Solon Playing to an article, I will recommend that highly. It's excellent. And then here's one of the better ones I found on the player agency. That's a theme that we try to bring up a lot, which is players own their decisions. So any questions before we all get lunch? Yeah? Sounds like everyone wants some lunch. All right, have a good lunch, everyone.